Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to another week, another edition here of the PondCast, a very impromptu edition, might I add, as this is the second PondCast of the week. I'm, of course, your VIP. With me, I'm joined by Kuro, handling the production side of things, and by all the lovely people in the chat as well. Welcome, one all. Bienvenidos, everyone. Bienvenidos. We are here. We have returned. This is an emergency PondCast, as, of course, I woke up this morning. Actually, I was up last night, and before going to bed, I was greeted by BAM! New patch. PTR patch notes have been released less than 24 hours ago, and we could have waited until the next podcast, which is a week from now, or we did have a bit of some space available here in our schedule to go live. This is meant to be our evening off, by the way, but we can take this time to go over the patch notes and to discuss what has been going on, as it is a very controversial patch note. Oh boy. So first things first, we were aware that there was a patch in the works for the past month, maybe more than that, that there was something in the works. I think we were made aware that specifically something that was going to be addressed here were the high yield gas geysers and mining. I know there was a lot of discussion regarding, say, the worker starting number as well, and whether or not that would change. So there was definitely a lot of rumors regarding that. We knew there was going to be a patch. We didn't know when, and now we finally did get it. I didn't know any other specific. Any other specifics outside of there was a patch coming, and now it finally has been revealed, and it's a crazy one, by the way. Once again, something that I should open up with as well, just because this is something that we've been harping on for the past half a year, if not more than that. And every now and then, especially for this, I was going through and looking at other comments and perspectives from other people in the community as well. I think it's important to remind everyone as well why this is happening. And again, it's overall, I would say, a good thing in the sense that we're getting these regular patches is due to Microsoft's acquisition of Blizzard. Microsoft did acquire Blizzard quite some time ago, and it takes a year or two for them to go through all the different departments, insert their own people, and start to take over the kind of day-to-day and even the direction of a bunch of their assets they've acquired, including StarCraft, Warcraft, World of Warcraft, Diablo, etc. And something that we have noticed over the past year of StarCraft's attention, and not just StarCraft but other Blizzard IPs, has been that they've been suddenly revitalized in their own way. We spoke about how last year Heroes of the Storm. Heroes of the Storm, for the first time in years after being abandoned, got a massive patch. And got a big revitalization. The other big one is Warcraft 3. Warcraft 3 also got a big patch, also got a big revitalization as well. We've been getting more attention when it comes to WoW Classic, and of course StarCraft got their big patch last year, end of last year as well, post end of partnership with EWC and all of that stuff. So these, and not just that, but of course the partnership with Archon Studios working on the StarCraft miniatures game, the cross collaboration of Hearthstone and StarCraft, and now StarCraft and Diablo as well. When it comes to cosmetics, when it comes to that kind of like cross pollination of like using this IP in other ways. When it comes to Blizzard working with Nexon, if you recall, Nexon, they acquired Blizzard's StarCraft IP to create their own game, and rumors are that that's going to be an FPS game that they're working on. Still, what, 3-4 years out of development, but we know that they did partner with Nexon. That was at the beginning of the year, if you remember, to work on another StarCraft game, not an RTS. Bear that in mind, or unlikely it's going to be an RTS. But not just that, but StarCraft merch. For those who don't know, there was a deal made with another apparel company for old school like StarCraft Brood War like shirts and like kind of like retro outfits and stuff, which was really cool. But basically, the IP of StarCraft has been getting more attention in recent times, and there's a very, very, very high chance that this is due to Microsoft acquisition of Blizzard, and that's why that we're getting more attention. That's why we're suddenly getting all these patches. The other big one, how could I forget, is Blizzard Cup, right? After years, StarCraft is at BlizzCon again. For those who don't know, or for those who don't remember, because it was announced quite some time ago, but the Blizzard Cup is a thing that's happening at BlizzCon. That's going to be in September, not too long away, and that's also a big revitalization of the older games that are once again getting attention again. Now, obviously, we have to say this, that we have to kind of like have a bit of a caveat and be like, yo, this doesn't mean that that like, oh, we're getting like old school Blizzard attention again with like, with WCS. Like, no, not at all. But what we can say with certainty here, of course, is that now, instead of Activision Blizzard, now Microsoft Blizzard, they are giving their IPs more attention. They're giving them more supports. They're giving them more funding. Now, instead of just an intern, he might be getting paid. the intern, no longer an intern, pappy. But like, these are positive things. And obviously, you have to temper expectations. This, again, as I mentioned, this doesn't mean like, oh my god, this means like we're getting everything back. No, not at all. But these are still good signs and good things to come. And obviously, it's one of those things where I think we mentioned this last time we had this kind of discussion. And that is that it's going to take a while for Blizzard, and now Microsoft Blizzard, to kind of regain the goodwill that they once had with the community, right? Because for a very, very long time, Blizzard had like a really close connection with the community, for many, many years, regarding StarCraft and World of Warcraft and their other and Diablo and even Overwatch when that first came out as well. And then over time, right, like that kind of waned and that deteriorated over time to the point where now a lot of people look at Blizzard, especially with what they eventually became, as very, very different to what they used to be back in the day when they were kind of like gamer first or community first sort of thing. And a lot of that goodwill has since gone, and that's something that has to be rebuilt. And it's going to take years, right? It's going to take years for that to really occur and for people to really have faith in Blizzard again. And I don't think it's a bad thing, right? Like, it's something that has to be earned, not just given. But these are once again things that are moving in the right direction, in the sense that they're looking after their games, they're looking after their IPs, and of course they are, because Microsoft spent a lot of money acquiring all of them. So that's the first thing I want to kind of go through again. And I feel like we have to say this every time there's another big patch here, and we've been saying this for since the last patch, essentially, is what we've been focusing on. So that's one thing. The other thing, of course, is these are some pretty crazy changes. Again, we spoke about this last time. Very bold changes were proposed in the previous patch, in the previous PTR, when it came to the change to the storm. If you remember, that was like the big thing. That was like, whoa, this is crazy. And now, once again, bold decisions are being made here. Whether they're good or not, well, let's jump into it. Let's go, Bible. Let's go. As we are getting in, we do have a change. Or quickly going over their brief and their rationale, we've tried to make this PTR focus on extending the early and mid-game experience, allowing players to remain competitive on 1 to 3 bases for longer periods. We've introduced changes to make non-warped gateway play a more viable path, while also increasing overall strategic diversity across all 3 races. In addition, a range of quality of life improvements has been implemented to enhance the overall player experience. Okay. So that's kind of like their rationale coming into this, and then now we have the big economic change. This is one of the controversial things. I would say it's this one and the Protoss changes that we'll get into later, which are the biggest ones. Obviously, there's a lot of changes that are being made, and they have a lot of ramifications. We'll go through them. For now, the economy. We're going down from initially 12 workers to 8 workers. For those who remember, back in Wings of Liberty, it was 6 workers. That's why a 6 pool was the thing, if you recall. It is not quite going all the way down to that. It's going down to 8 workers instead. This is something that has been debated and discussed quite a lot over the past maybe year. For quite some time. I would say that Pig is maybe one of the bigger community members and influencers out there that has devoted a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money as well, hosting show matches, hosting tournaments, creating a mod which does feature lower worker counts. I know that he was experimenting with 6, experimenting with 10, experimenting with 8 workers as well. He put a lot of work into that. And if you want specificities, like more specifics as to what this does or what this typically entails, I would defer to Pig more than anyone, just because he has the most experience with this. And I was listening to his thoughts earlier, and what Pig was saying was that obviously having a work, and we'll get into the mineral patches, but when it comes to having a low worker count, this will increase diversity. This will increase strategic play in the early game, 100%. Obviously, this does have a little bit less impact when it comes to the mid to late game. The overall kind of mid to late game should still be looking very similar to what we have right now, aside from the changes that are going to be made later. But like getting there is still going to be very similar. But the early game, I should say, should be a little bit more diverse, and there should be a little more exploratory builds and just a little more exploration when it comes to the early game, which I think is a good thing. I say this because very quickly, when it comes to the current meta, when it comes to current StarCraft, and again, I take pride in this, but we cast more StarCraft than anyone else out there. More than Wardy, more than Pig, more than Steadfast, more than Rotterdam, more than anyone else. And right now, when it comes to the meta of StarCraft, mainly ZVP, ZVT, TVP as well, the early game is incredibly stale at the moment. Obviously, there are niche builds and niche openers. You can still go for cheese and proxy. 2-racks Reaper is still a thing for Terran players, or 3-racks bunker rushes in TVZ, or say proxy gateway or proxy Stargate in PVT, for example. Like, there's still these niche builds and these niche openings. But when it comes to quote unquote standard, but there's a niche, right? You see those kind of builds every now and then. When it comes to a standard game, which is the majority of the games that you cover, the early game is very, very stale and very, very standard, and there's not really much diversity when it comes to that early game. I think the worst of it is probably ZVP. I think ZVP is probably that at the most extreme, where it's so rare to not have a Stargate open. To just go gate expand, Cybercore into Stargate, into Oracle, into third base, and for the Zerg player to go hatch gas pool into a third, and that's it, right? Like what I just said, like that's like the first 5 minutes, sorry, the first like 4 minutes of the game. Like that's like that, and that's it, and that's all you get in ZVP for the most part. Like every now and then you get like a Twilight Council opener instead for the Protoss, which goes into like Lava Depths or DTs every now and then. Otherwise, that's maybe for Zerg you get like a hatch block. You get like proxy hatch and a hatch block, and maybe that happens. Whenever these things happen, we always give it attention, of course. But again, these niche builds are very few and far between. For the most part, it is very, very stale. Which I would say is a negative aspect of the meta right now. I was listening to a couple of others. I think it was mainly Thermal talking about how a lot of this is just due to the fact that the early game for a lot of these matchups hasn't changed in a very long time. So they've more or less been figured out in the sense that you know what to look for, you know what timings you're vulnerable at, you know where to look as well. Obviously, maps do impact that a little bit more. But for the most part, like because the early game has been the same for so long, like it's just there's nothing there really, not too much. Which is a shame, and this will shake that up quite a bit actually, which I would say is a good thing. There are other criticisms about having a too low of a worker count when it comes to the early game being a little bit too slow, and I think I've heard from a couple of different players that's not a bad thing, at least from the player side of thing. From the viewer side of thing, that might be more of like a negative aspect, because that is going to slow down standard play. I will say that in the short term, there's going to be a lot of people like exploring and being more diverse and having a little bit more freedom in the early game. But when and if things slow down a little bit more, like, does that mean that the early game might become longer and more stale? Like, that is a possibility. That's something that we have to wait and see what happens, or whether or not we see something completely different, and whether the openers and early game and meta shifts quite a bit. I know that Pig was talking a lot about drone scouting, how drone scouting is very rare nowadays, and the possibility of that being more common just because of the potential for early game aggression, because of the overlord change as well, which we will get to. But there's potential for that. There's potential for, especially with, I mean, the I would say maybe the biggest criticism, actually, the one that has the most weight and the most value, is that because there are so many changes happening at once, it's hard to really hone in on whether something is going to be successful or not. Because I was about to talk about Protoss, and Protoss is having a big change. Like, Protoss as a race is changing heavily. So there's all these moving parts, right? There's all these moving parts when it comes to scouting being more difficult, when it comes to lower workers, when it comes to increased mineral patch sizes as well, with increased resources on 2 bases, when it comes to Protoss and the change that's going to be happening in Warp Gate. Like, there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot happening at once. And you could argue that's a good thing, because everything's like shaken up and it's going to take a while for people to, like, quote unquote figure things out. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, the downside of this is that it's going to be difficult to really, like, lock into one aspect of this patch to be like, is this working or is this not working? Like, is this achieving what we wanted to achieve or is it not? And what to adjust and what to tweak coming into the live version of the game. There's valid criticism there for sure. Anyway, so we have the lower working start. The next big thing, of course, as I just mentioned, is that the large and small mineral patches are going to be increased. I say increased. Overall, bases will have more resources, and that does mean that if you're going to be stuck on 1 and 2 bases for a little bit longer, then you have a little bit more viability and longevity in a game. Now, what this means here is a couple different things. One, we spoke earlier how the low worker count means there's more potential for aggression and cheese and early tech and early shenanigans. It also means that as you stay on a lower base count, you're not punished as much either. So 2 base all-ins and maybe even 1 base all-ins are going to be a little bit more prevalent as a result of that, and they're going to be a little bit more viable as well. On the flip side of things, likewise, as the defending player, staying on 2 bases is going to be less punishing as well, right? You're going to be able to stay on that a little bit longer to be able to eventually break out and expand and take your 3rd base as well. I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing. I mean, it depends on your perspective, of course. The lower base count in the past, the rationale for Legacy of the Void was that it forces people to expand faster. But the thing is, with the current meta and the current state of things, after us being in Legacy of the Void for so many years, is that we go to the point where we just skip the early game, we just mass expand very, very quickly as well, and just rush into the mid game as best as we can. And there's definitely, like, conflicting ideologies as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Is it a good thing that right now the first 4 minutes of the game are stale and nothing happens, and we try to rush into, like, 3 base play? Is that a good thing, or should we be having more strategic play before that? Like, I would say we should. I would say that it would be a positive thing if we do shake things up before that kind of mid-game play, instead of every game kind of rushing to the mid-game instead. Obviously, like, that's from, like, a caster or viewer perspective. Obviously, players, they like to get up to a higher base count and play with a higher base count and have, like, an economy and have bigger armies. Like, as a player, like, that does, like, especially as an amateur player, like, that's something that's a little bit more idolized, or that's something that you want to get to for sure. So I understand that as well. Yeah, we'll see how things change, of course, moving forward. The other big change, of course, was the high yield gas geyser. High yield gas geysers are now going to be less valuable. This was something that was discussed by map makers quite heavily. How, because high yield gas geysers were so influential and because it was so valuable, they were quite limited in how they could use them. But now that they have a little bit less impact, then they can be more free to use them more, right? To have multiple high yield gas geysers and have them be a little bit more prevalent and have a little bit more freedom when it comes to the map maker perspective, which I think is a good thing as well. Like, it's always good to have a little bit less restrictions on these map makers when it comes to what they create for us for the TLMC, for sure. The next big change, of course, in relation to the change to the economy, and this, I believe, is applicable to all main buildings, the hatchery, the lair, and the hive, supplies are reduced from 6 to 4. And I believe that's going to be across the board for Nexus and for CCs as well, is reduced supply from buildings, which again just coincides with the reduced worker scouts and with the economic changes. The next big change is creep. Creep, the reseed and spread rate has been lowered. This means that it takes a little bit longer for you to spread the creep, for the creep to spread from the tumor itself, and also takes longer for it to recede from the tumor itself as well. This is something that's been changed quite a lot over the years. The most recent change was that it receded faster, much faster, and that meant that obviously creep denial was even more brutal. That impacted ZVT quite heavily. It also meant that obviously like proxy hatches and things of that nature were weaker as well, because they would be cleaned up even faster. So it looks like here we're kind of pushing back on that a little bit more. And again, just because this did have a little bit more impact specifically in ZVT, looks like that's kind of what this is addressing more so than anything else. Up next, we have the spore change. Damage against biological increase from 20 plus 10 to biological to 20 plus 15 to biological. This is specifically for ZVZ. For those that are unfamiliar with current ZVZ, because of the changes earlier in the previous patch to the Spire to make mutaplay more viable and more accessible, it meant that right now in ZVZ, mutaplay is all the craze. Like, mutaplay is very prevalent. It's either you all in and you kill your opponent before they get to mutas, or they get to mutas and you're stuck playing against mutas, and no one likes that. and it's brutal being stuck and contained, and mutaplay has been very prevalent as a result of that. Or I say prevalent, there's been a lot, the meta has been revolving around the mutaplay in ZVZ at the highest level, which is getting to mutas or stopping your opponent from getting to mutas as well, and being able to deny that. And this is to help with that. This is to take some of the strength away from the muta in ZVZ, so that it's not as oppressive as it is. And again, this is a byproduct to the Spire change and to the muta change that happened previously, which happened end of last year, the last patch. Up next, we have the carapace upgrades, level 1, level 2, level 3. It is all cheaper here. This is going to be interesting. Obviously, these carapace upgrades are most crucial when it comes to ZVT versus Terran, specifically against Bio, just because the attack rate of biological units is very high, and that applies to every attack, which is why armor upgrades are stronger against Marines, just because that every attack at that high attack rate is applied to every single hit, which means you get to minimize more damage. It also means that you can ideally have your Lingbane collapse on your opponents as their melee-based units. So this is going to be going back to the cost of melee upgrades, actually. Carapace upgrades, for those who don't know, did cost more than melee upgrades, and now they cost the same. I did hear some people theorizing that, so the way that the meta works right now is, one, carapace upgrades are really important against Terran. Carapace upgrades are borderline useless against Protoss. Against Protoss, if you go double Eva Chamber, you often go +1 melee and +1 range. Right? It's very rare to get carapace upgrades against Protoss. It's not really worth it, just because of a couple of different factors, but the main factor is that Zerg units die very quickly against Protoss. so the carapace upgrade it's less impactful. It means less because you're gonna die quickly anyway, and it just doesn't really mean much. I did hear that because this is cheaper, it might mean that now it's a little bit more valuable to actually invest into carapace upgrades in ZVP and go double Eva Chamber and get those upgrades, just because it's cheaper and now you can justify it that much more. I don't know if it will. I think the meta is still going to be just avoid carapace upgrades against Protoss. There are niche situations where it can work. I would say probably the most niche situation where it works is against like carrier, if you're going for like a Hydra timing. If you're going for a Hydra all-in, just because the interceptors are similar to Marines in the sense that they have like high attack rates, like their damage is low, but there's a lot of that, and that applies to every carapace upgrade, of course. So that's like maybe the most niche situation for that sort of thing, but like outside of that, you never really would get it. So, and I think that's gonna still be the case, but we'll see if anything changes with that regarding ZVP. The other area where carapace upgrades are important is ZVZ. There are a bunch of all-ins that do incorporate +1 carapace, and that's going to be buffed, essentially. There's a very common all-in. It's a solar all-in, where you go into a Roachling all-in or Roachling Ravager all-in with +1 carapace, just so your army, your Lings, they can survive bailing shots, of course. Your Roaches are more bulky and more robust against Lings. Lings have a high attack rate, so same thing happens there, where carapace works very well against Lings when you're using Roaches. And there's a lot of all-ins using that, so that might be that will be bolstered, of course, as well. Something to bear in mind. But those are the really kind of big things that are going to be impacted. ZVZ when it comes to those carapace all-ins, and ZVT when it comes to saving some resources when it comes to playing macro against Terran, against Bio Terran. Up next is the Infestor change. This is pretty huge, actually. We'll get into it. So first things first, Microbial Shroud range increased from 9 to 12. That is insane. That is massive range for the Microbial Shroud. Something important to bear in mind is that I would say that this is a bit much just because this is a little bit disingenuous. That is the cast range, but remember, when you cast the Microbial Shroud, you're casting it, and that's going to be the epicenter of the cloud. The cloud expands from there as well, so it actually goes out even further. So 9, in my opinion, was perfectly fine. To improve it even further, if this feels like one of those buffs that's like, hey, use this spell. That's what this feels like. It's like, hey, we got this spell. We don't like that. Not enough people are using it because it's very niche, and it is. Microbial Shadow is a very niche spell. We want more people to use it, and we're going to buff the hell out of it just to force pro players to use this and to be able to properly judge and scale this spell to then like wheel it back if we need to, and they probably will have to wheel it back. But that's what that change feels like. Is that it's like it's forcing people to pay attention to use this ability. The other change, of course, is Microbial Shroud cannot be cast without requiring the upgrade from the Infestation Pit. I think this is a good change. One of the reasons why this ability is so niche is because it is gated behind an upgrade in the Infestation Pit. Right now, whenever you see this ability used, at the beginning of the year, there was a niche all-in build in ZVP where you would go mass ultra, you'd rush ultra and go Microbial Shroud against Protoss. That build came and went. Protoss, they were able to recognize it, able to punish it, able to scout it, respond with Mass Robo and Mass Immortal, and even with the Shroud, like it did not matter. So I want to say that build in ZVP was prevalent in December and a little bit of January. Like last year, December, a little bit of January. We saw it a lot from Lambo. We saw it a lot from some of the European Zerg players. So Lambo, Raynor, I think he was doing it as well. And it didn't last long. But it had a nice little brief stint. Then didn't last long. Nowadays, you mainly see this in ZVT. Right now, the meta and the very common meta amongst players like Shin, Solar, Rogue, and even Raynor as well, he's been doing his own variations of this, is to go 2 base Roach, 2 base Roach into 2 base Roach into a 3rd base. You slowly expand, you get your lair up and running, you go into Infestation Pit, you get Safety Infestors, and then you rush into Hive, into Ultras, and then bam, you hit with Ultra Microbial Shroud. That's a very common tactic currently in late game, in end game, pro game ZVT, and this is going to allow for the Infestor to be more to hit harder, to hit faster, of course, as you no longer need the upgrade. It does mean that you might even be able to use this pre-Ultra and use it with the Roach Ravager instead. It does open up a bunch of possibilities now, because we were already going for this kind of composition to begin with, and now this can hit earlier. It can hit earlier, now it has increased range as well. I would imagine that we're going to be seeing this utilized a lot more with the Roach Ravager, kind of like break these siege lines and to go for these big timing attacks in ZVT. In my mind, that would make the most sense. Even before the Ultra, like that's a big possibility here, which is why like I feel like increasing the range is one step too far, and I can easily see that change being removed from the PTR notes after testing, but testing is going to be required, of course, to kind of like confirm that. So we'll see. Microbial Shroud being used in other aspects. I mean, this will open the gate and open the door to maybe see Microbial Shroud used in ZVP for Hydra timings if your opponent's trying to go into Sky Toss. Obviously, this doesn't really help against Storm, right? But it does help against other things. So like it's going to allow players to explore with this build and to explore with the spell a little bit more in other avenues. I don't really see this really working too well in ZVZ, just because trying to tech into the Infestation Pit while you're in Roach Wars is very difficult to afford that without just dying. But we might see it there as well. Like there's definitely value for it. Yeah, we could see it in ZVZ actually. We might, just because you don't have to get the upgrade. Like it's just the Infestation Pit. So maybe there's potential for sure. I feel like they've gone a little bit too far with it, but specifically when it comes to the range, that aspect, I think removing the upgrade is fine. Or I think that's a positive thing, just because it's just so niche. It's just Microbial Shroud feels kind of like the Swarm host for Zerg, where it's something that they've they've messed around with a lot, and they've never quite found a good place for it. And they're trying. They're trying. Up next is Neural Parasite on Builder SCVs that will only expire at structure completion. I think a lot of people have called this like the content creator like patch, like the change where this really only like it's for people like Euthermal or Winter or Loco or Hearthstone or people that make like fun, YouTube videos where they have like a viewer challenge or something where they want to like neural something and build an opposing army. Like that's kind of what this is for. You're not going to see this in pro play. It's for the content creators. True. Now has an auto attack weapon. I believe this is going to be applied to multiple different spellcasters. This is basically the High Templar change. I would say this is also a little bit controversial. If you remember, one of the big things, one of the big discussions that was being had was all or nothing. Either all the spellcasters have an auto attack, or none of the spellcasters have an auto attack. It's one or the other, and I would agree with that. I would kind of fall into that camp, and I would agree that either you do it for everything or you do it for nothing. It looks like we're doing it for everything. So Templar get the auto attack, Infestor gets the auto attack. I would push it further and just give it to the Raven, give it to the Viper, just give it to all the spellcasters. Just why not? Just quality of life. But that's what this is. Basically, they're like, hey, let's like standardize this a little bit and add it to some of these other spellcasters, and they're adding it now to the Infestor. Viper Abduct now considers siege tanks a valid target. This is a reversion of the previous patch, which I think is a good thing. Anything that de-incentivizes hyper turtle heavy play, I would say it's a good thing. It's kind of weird that they made this change to begin with. It looks like they've recognized that this was maybe not a good thing to do, so they have pulled back on that, which I think is a good thing, that they've taken some feedback and they've applied that here. Up next is the Overlord. Speed without numerous carapace has been decreased. This is due to the economic changes. They do need to make it a little bit more difficult to scout, especially when the early game is going to be as diverse as it is, and because of the economic changes. So again, reducing or delaying Overlord scouting, especially because everyone else's scouting is going to be delayed because all their builds are going to be delayed as well, referring to Terran and Protoss. This also has to be pulled back in line with Terran and Protoss as well, because the Overlord is available immediately, whereas with other forms of scouting, I mean, sure, they're worker scouts, but when it comes to like Adepts or Sentry Scouts, Hallucinations, Adept Shades, Reapers, like that's all going to be delayed when it comes to standard openers, so that has to apply to the Overlord as well. Can now issue load nearby units commands. This is another one of these quality of life changes, which I could be mistaken, but I think this is applied to some of the other units. Yes. I scroll down. This is also going to be applied to the medevac as well. Basically, it's going to be, hey, you can press a button, and then anything that's under the Overlord, bam, gets lifted up. So you don't have to like manually target or manually select. It's just, again, a quality of life change. Obviously, if you want specific units, then you're going to have to select them specifically. Like Micro is still going to be incentivized, but this is a way to like just very quickly load things up. That's going to be done to the Overlord, and it's going to be done to the medevac as well. I don't think it's being done to the War Prism, which is kind of weird. Like I would assume it gets done to all three in my mind, right? Like it's, as I said before, when it comes to the High Templar auto attack, if you're going to do it for one thing, do it for all of them. And I don't think this applies necessarily to the War Prism, but that might be because the War Prism has increased pickup range, and that might mess things up. So that's, in my mind, I think that's probably the rationale for that, is because the pickup range of the Prism, it's probably a little bit weirder to have that automatically pick up units, because then it's further out and it's a little bit weird. So I would imagine that messes things up, like internally, I mean, for whoever's making these changes. Up next is the Overseer. Overseer Changelings. The Rogue nerf. True. Changelings automatically inherits the right, this I kind of glossed over it, but this also means that period in general, Overlord scouting is going to be weaker, which I don't think is a bad thing. I know that there was a discussion about Overlord scouting that was being raised when changes were being made to Sentry Hallucination scouts, right? There was a lot of discussion about PVT scouting, or just Protoss scouting in general, and how strong it is, especially with the NG overcharge change as well, if you remember, where you could NG overcharge, you can send out hallucinations and just keep sending them out and just see everything. And that was addressed in the last patch when it comes to how much NG the NG overcharge actually provides. That was the hope, at least, in regards to that patch. And there was also discussions about Overlords and about how, in general, like, you do want to make it a little bit more difficult for people to scout. You don't want them to just get free information and just free scouting. You want them to work for it. This also goes in line with what we mentioned previously about the potential of drone scouting, right? Because of the changes to the economy and the amount of workers and the potential for early tech, drone scouting may be a requirement, or there might be more value in drone scouting, especially with that in conjunction with the fact that Overlord is now slower as well, right? So for Zerg players, the idea of drone scouting, that might have to become a reality where that's a lot more standard. I say maybe because obviously it's still too early to tell whether it'd be worth it or not. Up next is the Overseer change. Overseer changelings automatically inherit the current order queued of the casting Overseer. Okay, quality of life. And changelings' death are contagious to other nearby changelings. I say the rogue nerf, but really, rogue, he stopped going mass changeling quite some time ago. That he was notorious for, you know, that mass Overseer style, but that was what, Stars of Gore, like 2 years ago. Like that was that was quite some time ago, and that kind of style kind of it rose and then it fell off as well. That definitely fell off when it comes to viability at the pro level. But despite that, this is still going to be quite nice because in general, in late game ZVT and ZVP, changelings are everywhere. Like, it's quite common to send out just wave after wave of changelings. It's very common in ZVP, late game ZVP, for Protoss players to spend storms on changelings. You have like a massive wave of changelings coming, you just spend like a storm just to clear them all up. That does happen at the pro level. So the idea of no longer needing that, I think, is probably a good thing. Like the amount of changelings, especially in the late game, was pretty insane, and this is a way to counter. I say a way to counter that. Obviously there's counterplay available now. Zerg players are going to be incentivized and they're going to be benefiting from splitting their changelings because it's very common to just spam changelings and just send them out. But now split the changelings, pappy. Now, unironically, like if you split your changelings, then this change won't impact that, and you can still get away with having changelings everywhere as long as you spread them out enough. Obviously, I'm sure math is going to have to be done to see, and testing done to see how close changes need to be to each other to trigger that death animation. How close they need to be, how far apart they need to be. I'm sure a bunch of testing is going to be done, and that's going to be like an added kind of show of skill, if you will, like in a longer and later game for Zerg players to flex. Okay. Up next, we have the Mutalisk. And this is the final Zerg change. The Mutalisk Glaives now prioritize targets. Once again, this is kind of quality of life. It means it does bounce to priority targets instead of, you know, whatever's closest, I suppose. So again, that's just quality of life. Then the arc slope increased to 180. From my understanding, this is in regards to targeting and what happens when a unit gets out of range of a Mutalisk auto attack, and how quickly it like detargets, something of that nature. Maybe we can get some clarification regarding that, but I feel like these are more or less like quality of life or micro changes for the Mutalisk to make them a little bit more effective, essentially, or some micro changes. Hold on. And that's the end of the Zerg changes. So when it comes to the Zerg changes here, there are a couple of things that are nice, like the duct change, or the reversion of the duct, for example. The infestor change is huge, and I do think that the main reasoning and the rationale for that is just to incentivize players to use it, because right now it's a very, very niche ability, and they want people to use it more because there's so much potential there. I do think, and I do believe that they're going to be winding it back. They're going to be pulling back on it a little bit. In my opinion, when it comes to the cast range, like I don't think it needs to be 12. That's still crazy to me. that's insane. Like that also removes a bunch of counterplay as well when it comes to EMPs or feedbacks, right? Like the further the infestor away is, then I mean, how do you feedback? How do you EMP, right? Like you want that counterplay to be available, so that does feel a little bit obscene. So in my mind, I can see that changing, but I mean, time will tell. The Spore Crawler change, again, that's for ZVZ. Like the Carapace changes might impact ZVP, but unlikely. This is mainly going to be benefiting ZVT more than anything, and will allow for Zergolins and ZVZ to be a little bit stronger. The creep changes are nice, I suppose. But of course, the economy is kind of like the big one, overarching all of this, of course. So just catching up with the chat. Catching up. When will this be implemented? There is no set time for when this is going to be implemented. Obviously, I would hope that we at least get a month of testing. Ideally, more than a month of testing. I do know that actually, yeah, it might mess things up. If you remember, there are certain things that are occurring that they might want to line up with. If you remember, the big one is the new season in June. If you're paying attention to the TLMC, Wax, he was very public about stating that ideally he wanted the Team Liquid map contest maps to go live in June with the start of the new season. We're getting into June, and it would make sense if the new season and the new ladder map pool hit with a new patch. I don't know when in June exactly, but if you remember, like that's a current date. And the concerning thing there is that means that there's not a lot of time. That means like a month, right? Like if we want to hit with a new season, with a new ladder map pool, with the TLMC maps, June is when that is. Personally, I hope that we have more time to work with the PTR, but that's the first big date. That's the first big event in my mind that would make sense for them to want to push a patch through, would be alongside the TLMC.
I want to update, unless something changed, because that's of course possible. The next season was scheduled to start July 19th. Next ladder season.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go, July. So I guess Wax, he probably just said end of June, which meant like start of July.
No,
but like
I think he wanted like earlier in June, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, in my mind, like it would make sense for it to line up with Wax's statement about the TLMC maps. We'll see if that happens or not, right? But that makes sense in my mind. That's gonna be the first date that I think of, and if we get past that, then it's like, oh, then maybe, as Kura said, July, right, with the new season, like first of July even. So those are kind of like the first kind of big dates that I'm looking at. But I hope that isn't the case, because I do want more time testing, right? I think everyone would want that.
Yeah, I will say it's a bit unfortunate where like everybody's spending so much time testing the TLMC maps, and then the new patch comes in and like all this testing actually didn't mean all that much, because the changes are so radical that the game is completely different.
Well, if you remember, the same thing happened last season. If you remember, we were judging
as big is my point.
Kind of. Okay. Not as big, but they did impact it. If you remember, so for those that don't remember, the last TLMC, I was one of the judges for it, and one of the things that I was saying is that there were rumors at the time then as well that a new patch was coming, and it felt weird because we were judging and critiquing the maps on the current patch when we knew there was another patch on the horizon, and that could change the meta. And one of the big things that changed in the meta was the removal of ARAXs. ARAX 3 base all-ins in ZBT, like that was stifled quite heavily because of the buff to the Baneling, if you remember, and Ling Bane being more viable, and that was kind of like the death of ARAXs. And I was legitimately considering the strength of ARAXs in a lot of the maps that I was judging in TLMC 21. So I remember that being a thing. It's like, I guess like like this is something that I didn't have to consider, I suppose, because of the removal of that with the patch. It's similar here, where obviously it's a even bigger influencing factor, where the patch hits right after the TLMC. It's like, like what are we doing? So it's really unfortunate. It feels like the reasoning for it is that like maybe there's like a set period where they bring in like the classics team to work on StarCraft, and they're like, okay, we're gonna have all the updates like in this one period of time, so it lines up with TLMC and the patch, which is a shame because ideally you have them separate. But it feels like it's probably intentional that it's all together, just because that's the one time that they work on it, you know. So I understand why, but it's a shame that that's the case. Just catching up. Catching up. What targets are prioritized? I do not know that. I don't know what has more priority over the other. I would imagine like certain like spellcasters hold a little bit more weight. So I would imagine that. So if mutas come, this is in regards to the muta priority change. If mutas go in and if they attack a High Templar, and if there's like a Zealot right next to the Templar and another Templar slightly away from it, I would imagine that if it's still within range of the glaive, that it'd go Templar Templar then Zealot instead of Templar Zealot Templar. Like that's an example of in my mind, like a Templar has more priority than a Zealot, right? Like I think that's an easy one. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit more. It's going to be a little bit harder to distinguish between like a Zealot and a Stalker, or I would imagine like a Sentry has more priority than a Zealot as well, like things of that nature, where the glaive balance would prioritize spellcasters over regular units, or like a Ghost, for example, where like it prioritize bouncing to a Ghost over a Marine, things of that nature. Obviously, I don't know the details, but like that's what my mind assumes, right? I'm worried because PTR is not used a lot. We'll address that later. The PTR is used a lot, so be careful about spreading news like that. We'll get there. We'll get there. Don't you worry. Galenus, don't you worry. We'll get to that. That's a weird talking point.
Yeah, I will emphasize that in the previous PTRs, like actually a lot of pro players have been on with testing, like they've been streaming their POVs. A lot of tournaments have been held on PTR, like previously, so people actually take the PTR seriously nowadays.
Yeah, we'll discuss that a little bit more when we wrap up the patch notes. So up next is Terran. Command Center, CC. Supplies provided reduced from 15 to 13. As I mentioned, this is going to be applicable to all of the main buildings, reducing supply. This is due to the economic changes, of course, and due to the different opening supply. Up next are the Ghosts. Okay, so the big one for the Terran is the Ghost. Supply increase from 2 to 3. I think this is a positive thing. I know a lot of Terran players, Big Gabe, Euthermal, a lot of Terrans were very vocal that it didn't make sense for them to revert this change. If you remember, this is a reversion. Previously, it was 3 supply, then they went back to 2. Now back to 3. So it was weird that they played around with this. Back to 3 supply. This is a positive thing in terms of de-incentivizing the massing of ghosts. That is a big issue in late game ZVT and late game ZVP as well, is the over prioritization and the over reliance on the ghost as a unit. And a lot of these changes have been focusing on that. And again, a lot of Terran players, a lot of pro Terrans have been vocal about this being a positive thing as well. We have the health reduced from 125 to 100. This was also a change done previously as well. Like there's also kind of like a reversion where they made the ghost a light unit, but then they increase its HP. Here they decrease its HP, still a light unit, bear that in mind. Then we have the attack damage change from 10 plus 10 versus light to a flat 20. So this mainly is applicable to TVP. In TVZ, this doesn't change anything because when it comes to the auto attacks, you're already up against light units, referring to Lings and Banelings, right? Like it's typically your ultras that are behind that, and that's when snipes are being used instead. So the idea of the flat auto attack damage being raised is mainly going to be applicable to TVP, where instead the ghost is being used to EMP units and then to auto attack whatever's in front of them. This is going to be impacting their damage, of course, to Stalkers, to Immortals, to Robo-based units as well. It's not the biggest impact and not the biggest change because you're never really relying upon the ghost to actually have their auto attack damage influence a fight. It's just something that's nice, it's added on. So this, again, is mainly going to be impacting Terran versus Protoss. So a slight buff here to like base damage TVP for the Ghost. Attack range increase from 6 to 7. Bearing in mind that's the attack range, not necessarily like the targeting. So that's also, again, going to be helping with that. Also, I guess, technically, when it comes to focus firing, you do see, outside of snipes, like focus firing on certain units, like does also occur with Ghosts, or just with the army in general. Steady targeting, this is the snipe ability. Damage increase from 130 plus 40 versus Psionic to a flat 170. So this is just an overall buff to the damage of the snipe. This, I believe, is also a reversion. Before this, it was 170, then it was changed to like plus versus Psionic, and then changed back. So this has been reverted to just be flat out stronger. Energy costs increased from 50 to 75. This goes along what I said previously, that we don't want to rely on too heavy of a ghost composition when it comes to the late game, because when you have that, you have 4 snipes available. Because this increase, now each ghost with full energy has 2 snipes instead of 4. That's a big change, a big change. So the base damage is increased, but now we have less snipes available here to the ghost, so you have to be more selective with that. But another big change to compensate is no longer cancels upon taking damage. So previously in ZVT, for example, and even in TVP, when it comes to storms and fungals were at times being used on ghosts to disrupt them and to stop snipes, just attacks in general. Of course, that is no longer the case, and it makes sense to do this if you're making it so ghosts have less snipes. If ghosts have less snipes, well, now they're going to happen regardless. You can fungal them, you can attack them, you can storm them, does not matter, the snipe will still go off. But now they have less snipes, of course, so that's kind of like the back and forth dynamic there. The Ghost is one of those units that's been changed quite a lot over time just because of its strength, and you don't want to take away too much strength, you don't want to add too much strength, of course. Again, as we mentioned, like, I would say most people are on board that is a negative thing for a Terran player to rely too heavily on a heavy Ghost army. I mean, they're good, so I mean that's why they are, but ideally we do want something that's a little bit more diverse, of course. We don't want the Ghost copy pasta to be to be too real, unfortunately. So it's going to be an interesting change for sure, especially when it comes to no longer being able to deny the snipe. Obviously the counterplay there would be to kill it, to be able to catch the army itself, but it does mean that you have to commit a little bit harder to engage with that Terran army. But again, to compensate, there are going to be less ghosts, there are going to be less snipes, so there's going to be that kind of back and forth here with the ghost itself. It's going to be interesting for sure. Up next, we have the medevac. We mentioned this change earlier, the quality of life change to the Overlord, also applicable here to the medevac, which now loads nearby units, and subgroup priority has been changed. This is not to the medevac, this is just a base like Terran change. The priority order updated from Raven, Ghost, BC, Marine, Marauder, Tank to Ghost, Marine, Marauder, Raven, BC, Siege Tank. Basically, whenever you had your army selected, the priority order chose what was like selected by default initially. So whenever you had your army selected, bam, the Raven, you have the Raven abilities up first. Here they changed it so the Ghost has priority. This is a good thing, I would say. It's a nice quality of life change, and then you get to tap quickly to your bio, which is then you can stim. Right, like those are kind of like the more important, like priority heavy, like abilities you're gonna be using like in the middle of a fight. Usually when it comes to your spellcasters, like your Ravens, you're gonna have that in a separate control group anyway, right? So the idea of having the Raven in front made less sense just because it's a bit of a more of a niche unit, and you typically have that separate regardless. So a nice quality of life change for Terran players and their subgroup priorities. Hard to snipe lurkers because Ghost take constant hits. True. That also is. I was thinking a lot more regarding like fungal growths, for example. But you're not wrong when it comes to also like that also happening when it comes to lurkers. True. No more bonus damage versus live VIP. True. Do any other casters accept to have alignment communication with Blizzard, even if it's only receiving info? No. I mean, I can only speak to myself and say no. From my understanding, I think everyone knows that Omni Skeptic. I think he has. I mean, we know that he's been helping when it comes to bug fixes. That I think is well known information. So there's like some line of communication there. But outside of that, like I don't believe.
For those who don't know, that is a map maker, by the way.
Oh yeah, Omnisceptic is a map maker. Does make some maps, and I know that he's been helping when it comes to bug fixes. Obviously, we know that Wax has communication with Blizzard just because he's in charge. Wax Angel is in charge of the Team Liquid map contest. But when it comes to like casters and content creators, like I don't think so. I can't speak to that. But scrolling down, we then have the Protoss changes. So up next is Protoss. Once again, Nexus change, which is applicable to the CC and to the hatchery as well. So once again, reduce supply from the base building. Up next is Warp Gate. This is the other huge, massive, controversial change, of course, is Warp Gate. This changes everything, by the way. It's crazy. So Warp Gate research has been moved to the gateway from the Cyber Core. Interesting. Warp Gate research speeds up gateway unit production time by 35%. So this is something that people have been asking for. I say people have been asking for. I know that Youthon's been asking for a long time. The idea of having the option to use gateway production like a Terran player, for example, and have the option to also have the warping mechanic as well, and kind of like have this kind of flow between the two states. And we're kind of getting that here as well, where Warp Gate production is going to be increased when the upgrade is researched for regular gateways, bear that in mind. And then to warp in a Warp Gate, you have to pay. It takes 50 gas and 50 minerals to be able to turn a gateway into a Warp Gate, whereas previously it was automatic and it didn't cost anything. So that's a big change. Warp in time is no longer determined by slow power field, so slow warp ins no longer exist. That is huge. Warp in time is decreased to 3 seconds baseline, and that is faster than any warp in that we've seen to date. So 3 seconds, bam, you can warp in. And Warp Gate cooldown values, you can see here, Zell from 20 seconds to 22. So that Warp Gate cooldown values have been increased here to compensate for that because of how fast these warp ins are going to be. This is a really huge change, and it is going to change how Protoss macros quite heavily. So what does this mean? So obviously, it's going to cost quite a lot of resources to warp in warp gates, and we found this that we were doing some testing. We were playing some games on the PTR before the stream, and something that like felt very intuitive is that obviously Protoss players are not going to be warping in, creating warp gates in the early to mid game necessarily. Like, you don't want to do that. You don't need to either. Like, the only reason you would need a warp gate early on is if you're going for like a DT based opener, or if you're going for an all-in. If you're going for an all-in and you want to warp in across the map, then warp gates make sense. But when it comes to like macroing and building up to your 2 and then 3 bases, you don't need warp gates. So that's something that you're, as a Protoss player, you're going to be avoiding. You're going to be avoiding warp gate. You're going to be using gateways like you would as a Terran player, for example. And then once you get into the mid game, that's when you're most likely going to be warping in some warp gates just so you can make use of the prison to harass across the map. Or also, it would be ideal to have those warp gates warped in for harassment units. So if you're playing and then bam, you have like a drop into, like a double drop into the main base, or a drop into the natural, or a drop towards the third base, then reactive warp-in is going to be necessary to be able to defend, assuming you don't have your army in position. True. If you have your army in position, you don't need it. But if there's ever a situation where you don't have your army where it needs to be, if you're lacking vision, if you're lacking map control, if a drop catches you by surprise, you will need those warp gates to be able to reactively warp in to defend your bases. So again, but that's in the mid game, right? That's going to be in the mid game. That's going to be up to like 3-4 base, like saturation, sort of like game state, I should say, 3 base kind of game state. So early on, there's a very low chance that you're going to have any warp gates unless you're going for early aggression and early all-ins and certain timing attacks. Otherwise, a couple of warp gates would make sense coming in towards the mid game, just to be able to defend against certain attacks, and then to be able to reinforce across the map as well. This change is going to be huge because one of the big oppressive things regarding specifically PvT is the warp gate. So if you know anything about late game PvT, you know that it's very common for Protoss players to have map control, to be up like 2, 3, 4 bases over the Terran player, for example. Terran player is contained, and they rely on very heavy gateway reinforcements. So the way that it works is that the Protoss player is usually on a very low gas count. They attack, they trade, they typically rely on trading out their gateway units. They back off, bam, they insta warp in, and then they keep going. Then they keep pushing. And they typically back off when they run out of gateway units, and they preserve their robo heavy composition and their high Templar. That's typically how like the mid to late game operates in TVP. This is going to be changing that dynamic because you're going to most likely it's going to take longer for your warp gates to come online because of how much you have to invest into them. So the idea of being able to like actively and reinforce in such a way, that's going to be a little bit diminished, or it's going to take longer for that to come online. Ideally, that will alleviate some of that pressure in TVP. I'll say that PvT, you know what I mean, Terra versus Protoss. right now, I will say that matchup does need help. That there's a lot of issues with that matchup in regards to the late game. I don't think anyone really. It's I would say a negative aspect of the game right now is late game PvT with how oppressive Protoss can be and how difficult things can be. Obviously, this is also partially because of the maps. Like the maps also play their role in that as well. But another reason for that is just how oppressive you can be with a mass gateway army, and of course with your mass expansions and map control as well. And this is going to be changing that dynamic 100%. It's going to change the way to get to that point as well, just period, right, getting to that point, being able to for example, like I'm thinking of PvT, like in the entirety of PvT is going to change. I'll be honest, I don't think this changes ZVP too much. In Zerg versus Protoss, it is very common for the Protoss player to just stay defensive. Just stay defensive, get your natural, get your third, get your fourth base, build up your army, and then break out. In ZVP right now, it's much more common that Zerg players are all-inning. We've been seeing a lot of three-base all-ins. A lot of three-base all-ins in ZVP, and it's just been all about Protoss players defending. Like, that has been the craze for the past 6 months. And I don't think that this change actually does much to ZVP. But specifically, TVP is going to be so much different because, especially in the mid-game actually, because of Blink Stalkers. Like Twilight Council Blink Stalkers into War Prism Aggression and War Prism Harass is so common, and not being able to reinforce and to get your Stalkers across the map and to apply that pressure suddenly means that Terran players have a lot more freedom to actually get a faster third and build up their economies or be aggressive themselves and fight for map control. Like this changes TUP quite heavily. I was initially talking about the late game, but even in the early to mid game as well, just because of how heavily reliant typically Protoss players are with Twilight Council Blink based play and Warpins as well. So that's good. That's going to be different as well. Like it's like this changes quite a bit when it comes to that matchup, which I think is a good thing. I would say that TVP is in a place that does need a lot of help. I mean, a lot of matchups are ZVP as well. To be fair, I would hope that the change to the economy helps when it comes to ZVP. It's a different issue. In Zerg versus Protoss, as I was mentioning, like Protoss players have gotten better and better at just defending and building up that death ball of an army to the point where now we see just non-stop all-ins from Zerg to just stop the game from getting there. And that's an issue that we're just seeing all-ins every game. That's the big meme about like RSL and GSL, is that we've had some really short broadcast days whenever we have ZVPs because it's just non-stop all-ins, and we rarely get to get a macro game anymore because of the current meta of ZVP. TVP is different in its own way. But yeah, this is going to change quite a bit, and I would say it's a good thing to shake things up and to explore some new builds and explore a new playstyle. Obviously, this patch specifically is going to impact Protoss players the most because there's a lot to relearn. There's going to be a lot to relearn when it comes to playing the game because of this change as well, because I would say Twilight Council openers being less valuable in TVP, so you'd have to go for, I'd say, like robo-based play being more popular as well, going back to hopefully this doesn't like revert us back to like Phoenix Colossus. Like that's that'd be the worst thing. But I would imagine no, because one of the reasons why Phoenix Colossus got phased out was because of Terran all-ins in TVP, which did kind of like spike up in popularity, and that stopped players from opening up Phoenix. So the meta is going to shift quite heavily actually in Protoss vs Terran. It's going to be crazy. Good. Pre-warp gate production times. We also have some more specificities there. When it comes to pre-warp gate and post-warp gate. Sentry hallucination automatically inherits the current order queue. This is similar to the Overseer and the Changeling, so same thing. High Templar, Psystorm, total damage reduced from 110 to 100. So again, Psystorm is really strong at the moment. I know a bunch of people were memeing that it was like, it does nothing now compared to what it once was. Like, that's still very strong, and they're kind of pulling back on that a little bit here, reducing it by 10. Disruptor now has a phantom attack weapon and War Prism. There is. Wait, what? Why wasn't it? Okay, there we go. So I think if you recall, I said earlier that I was confused why the Prism didn't also have the load nearby units. I think in my mind, I just assumed the Warp Prism was with the Warp Gate, like that was all together. So I scrolled down past Warp Gate. I didn't see Warp Prism. I was like, that's kind of weird, but it's there as well. So it's done to all three, to the Overlord, to the Warp Prism, and to the Medevac. The load nearby units. So nice quality of life applied to all three. It's all three pickup units. But yeah, it's gonna be wild when it comes to the macro changes here to Protoss and how that's gonna impact things. I feel like there's gonna be a bit of a learning curve. There's gonna be a learning curve, and you might see Protoss struggle in the short term as they try to like adapt and try to figure out like the best way to open up, when to get your warp gates, how many warp gates to get, whether it's worth getting them at all, whether you can cut them whenever possible as well, whether it's worth having like 2 warp gates early on, just like reactively warp in, or get more, get less. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, kind of like the balancing act of warp gates, how many to get and how many to rely on, and where to cut corners. Just catching up. I feel like now Protoss have to keep a certain time on basic gateway and switch to warp gate later. I think they'll stay on basic gateways for quite some time. As I mentioned, like I don't think you need warp gates until like the mid game necessarily. And even then, I don't think you need to warp in all your gateways and warp gates to begin with. I don't think that's necessary. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see kind of where they fall. But yeah, I think it's a mistake to think that you need to warp all your gateways into warp gates. I don't think that's even viable necessarily. So having worker and warp gate change at the same time, I think, is a bad idea. I think it's just going to make it difficult to really judge the impact of each change, which is what I said at the very beginning of this of the patch notes, how because there's just so many things that are happening at once, and 2 big things, which is the Protoss changes and the economy changes, like it's going to be a little bit harder to keep track of the impact of each change. Not impossible, but it's going to be harder for sure.
By the way, I feel like it would be good if you took a look at the quality of life changes as well. There's a lot of bug fixes, so I don't think you have to go through all of them. But yeah. I think from the point where it talks about Xel'Naga towers, because that's interesting.
Talk to us. I don't know where you are.
Okay. Let me
I don't know where
read them
it's
up.
a long list of bug fixes. I don't know where. I don't know where the Xel'Naga tower is.
Yeah, I recommend people going through it on their own, because there are some interesting fixes that I didn't even know some of them were broken in the first place.
Xel'Naga towers can now be selected through Fog of War. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. From that point, that's
Xel'Naga
like
towers
changes.
now show their vision range radius when selected. That's a nice quality of life change. Like that happens when you like click on a tank, for example. You get to see like the range. So that's nice. Active creep tumors will now take a selection precedence over inactive tumors. Okay. Critters and destructible neutral objects have been standardized to share similar targeting collision values. They'll no longer collide with or block player structures or units.
Like those are some big changes. Like they're very like tiny details.
They are big changes.
That's big changes.
I'll always remember. There were a couple of games. It was a couple of years ago now, during the COVID era of StarCraft, where there was like a Roomba in one of the natural bases of one of the maps, which would periodically like actually head towards the natural spawn location, and I remember a couple of times in pro games where it would actually block the hatchery or the nexus. Like I remember that happening. I remember that happening in ANZ Champs actually, and I think it happened to Probe. And Probe like he like did like a frowny face or something like in the chat when that happened. I remember Peely commenting on it when that happened. So that has impacted some games, unironically, when it comes to blocking natural bases. The Roombas. Lava eggs will no longer collide or block player structures or units. That's huge. The amount of times that I've had that you have like a hatchery die, and then you try to throw down your replacement hatchery, and the larval eggs are blocking it because you made like an overlord or you made like some drones or something. That happens really often. that happens very often. Okay, that's interesting. What else do we have? Oh, that's the other one that I saw a lot of. Protostructures now generate additional damage graphical models. That's nice. That's cool. I haven't seen that come into play yet. I think a lot of people are hoping that that's like the Brood War, like buildings catching fire thing. It would be nice if that's true. If the Protoss buildings start catching fire again. As lava increases, they will now spread further upwards around the sides of the hatchery. Lava will still start from the bottom of the hatchery. That's going to be interesting when it comes to, like, the Eric build, like Eric getting his own his macro hatchery early at the natural and having lava spawn on his side of the wall. That's that's going to be interesting. Music selection for spectator players has been adjusted to feature a greater pool of suitable tracks for spectating. Oh, this is the StarCraft Evolution change. Okay. Okay. For those who maybe don't watch StarCraft Evolution, for SC Evo, that's a different mod. They added a bunch of tracks. They added like the Nova Covert Ops like soundtrack and a bunch of other like soundtracks to mix through. So when you watch a game of StarCraft Evolution, there's actually unique music that's playing that you might not hear in regular 1v1. So yeah, it looks like they've taken note. They've the SEVO update. Let's go. Slightly polished oracles, revelation, and build animation transitions. Interesting. War Prism will now attempt to immediately siege when instructed rather than prioritizing deceleration. Ooh, so the Prism is going to now be snappier. It's now going to be more responsive to micro, to control. Okay. That's going to be nice. Mule repair is now set to auto cost by default. Interesting. That's very niche, but it means that like technically if you mule to repair, like it's going to start repairing immediately.
Also, I do think it's an important point. Mapmaker support tools now include proper worker-only path indicators, no resource footprints, air unit height modifier doodads, and variable rock reduction units, which is important for the new maps that are being created.
Yeah.
For those who don't, the air unit height modifier thing, I believe this prevents units from hiding in doodads. If you remember, there was that one map where you could literally hide an overlord in a doodad. So this will prevent that without, doing workarounds. Because I know that some map makers were like putting cliffs inside of doodads to like make sure that doesn't happen and stuff like that. But now they can just mark it as unbuffable.
I think it will also have an impact as it will make the games more control / micro intensive for toss in the early game. For sure, for sure. Just because, like, again, reactive warpins are going to be less available early on. Unless you scout all incoming. That's the other big thing. True. SCV build changes. Oh, I missed it. There's so many bug fixes. I can't. There's so many, Pappy. Hold on.
SCVs are at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Fix an issue where melee units targeting building SCVs will lose their attack order when the SCV moves to the structure. Okay. That's actually pretty huge when it comes to harassing building SCVs early on. This is huge when it comes to trying to delay the building CC, but also when it comes to proxy bunker rushes, I should say. True. Fix an issue when SCV could not have build orders queued. Okay, but yeah, I do recommend checking out the entirety of the list because there are a bunch of bug fixes, and some of them are definitely more impactful than some of them are like some niche changes, but some of these others do have some more like wider like ramifications, or they have more general applications.
Yeah, some of those are like more like Zergrogs were lacking polish. We added some like nice things, like more like this. But some of them are like, so this unit now behaves differently.
Yeah. For sure. Ooh, for sure. But yeah, it's a pretty huge patch. Some big changes being proposed as well. Obviously, there's the PTR. This is subject to change. And this is where I did want to emphasize something that Kuro touched on at the beginning that I want to wait till the end, which is the PTR itself. There's something that, and I already saw someone say it once earlier in the broadcast, so be careful out there. A bunch of content creators have been speaking on this and giving their opinions. Zombergub went live earlier today, and she had some very strong negative opinions about this, and you're entitled to your own opinion, of course. But there was one thing that she said that really bothered me, actually, just because of what we do and of what we were able to achieve recently as well. I think Zombergub said something along the lines of one, the reason why I began all of this starting off talking about how StarCraft has been getting more attention and more care and more support in general due to Microsoft's acquisition of Blizzard, and we began with that. I think Zorga was saying that she didn't have faith that they would make any changes or that StarCraft would get much support or much attention, despite these changes that have been occurring over time. But she said something along the lines of she doesn't believe that many people even use the PTR to begin with, and because of that, there won't really be any significant like data collected or any significant like games played to actually like test some of these changes and make any meaningful adjustments to them or anything of that nature. And I think she even said that the last time that any of that what actually happened was during some ESL Open Cups, where they forced the ESL Open Cups onto the PTR. And I remember that actually got me pretty upset, because if you remember, something that I'm very proud of is that in the last PTR, we did have the most testing done ever, not just for the PTR, but for TLMC, because as a whole, ourselves, alongside Comeback TV, alongside the Stegosaurus boys, KSL, for a lot of the open tournaments, we all decided, hey, we're going to run all of our tournaments on the PTR, and we're going to force everyone to play on the PTR. And we had the most testing possible done, because there were tournaments happening on a daily basis, every single day on the PTR. Because of that, forcing everyone, Clem, Max, Hero, Classic, Björn, Shin, Solar, everyone was playing on the PTR. I'm still in all the chats as well when I loaded into the PTR as well for all the tournaments. They were all forced to play on it, and we got the most testing done out, period, when it comes to last year's PTR at the end of the year, for that last patch that had the storm change, if you remember. Storm change with all the ghosts and all of that.
I specifically remember, I think it was Mana who was saying that like he was shocked that like that was the most PTR tested ever, that like everybody was actively playing it.
Yeah, like a bunch of pro players were very vocal about that, right? About this getting so much traction and so many tournaments taking part in the PTR and so much testing being done. And we did the same thing for TLMC 21. Right, where we had all the tournaments take place on all the TLMC maps to get the most testing done possible, and we did the same thing this season as well for TLMC 22, to the point where, if you're keeping up with the Team Liquid map contest, Wax even just came out last week with a statement saying that they actually pushed back the voting for the TLMC maps because there are so many tournaments going on right now that feature the maps, that are giving feedback, that are giving more data, and where map makers are taking that feedback and making adjustments and making changes and updating their maps as well, because so much testing is being done. So the idea, and again, someone said it earlier, the idea, the myth, the quote-unquote myth of like, oh, no one plays on the PTR, it just isn't based in reality. Like, the reality is that no, that's not true. Like, over the next couple of weeks, every tournament's going to be in the PTR. We are forcing all the players to play on them, and we are going to get testing done on them. The idea that no one does that, that's a very kind of like outdated or out of touch perspective. Tells me that you weren't watching StarCraft over the past, like, 6-7 months, because everyone was on the PTR and everyone was playing on the TLMC 21 maps and now 22 maps as well. So I did want to say that as well, that like, to if you do have some strong opinions about this, or you have some strong concerns about this, or you want to, or ideally you would hold off on and you'd be a little bit more reserved and wait to see some of these games yourself over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, because we're going to have Tuna Cup, we're going to have Monday Night Weekly, we're going to have Pixar Cups, we're going to have KSL. I'm going to speak to SC Boy about Kung Fu Cup as well. Again, we have tournaments every day, and the majority of them, not all of them, but the majority of them most likely are going to be on the PTR. I say majority, I'm a cold word, I call them out all the time. Unfortunately, unfortunately, Wardy's weekly, his Monday Night Weekly, his is the only one who doesn't incorporate the TLMC maps or doesn't go to the PTR, but that he has his own reasoning for that. He wants to stay partnered with OSC. OSC have a rule where you have to be on the current version of the game if you want to be partnered with OSC and get OSC sponsorship. That's applicable to us. That's applicable to the Pigstar Cups, to all the Open Cups, and we choose to disassociate with OSC for the TLMC period, for the PTR period. Like, we make the choice to just end the partnership while we're doing all this testing. Wardy makes a choice not to end the partnership and to keep that sponsorship and to stay on the base game and to stay on that current version of StarCraft. And it's his choice, that's fine. But like the rest of us, we just change it and we just end the partnership, we end the sponsorship, and we just go straight into like the PTR or TLMC maps because we feel like it's more important to have that testing done and to get as much data and feedback as possible. Wardy doesn't do that. That's fine. That's what he does. But for the rest of us, for the most part, like, we all just switch over, and expect that for the next like couple of weeks, at least until the PTR phase does end. What's the first PTR tournament? It'd be Monday Night Weekly for sure. Monday Night Weekly. What does PTR stand for? Public Test Realm. Public Test Realm. But yeah. So again, the idea that like the idea to be a little bit negative about this, thinking that you're not going to see pro players play on the PTR or anything of that nature, like, that's just not true. Again, a lot of the tournament organizers have enough incentive to want to push for their tournaments to be on the PTR, and most likely will. The other tournament that was on the PTR that I just forgotten was Alima League, but that was also, again, last year when Alima League was sponsored again. They started hosting their events on the PTR as well, for, again, further testing. Is when we gotta call up Chizik and start the sponsorship again. It's time. It's time to test the PTR.
I was gonna say, this is where the Crank tournament happens on PTR, but it's in July.
True.
So I don't know.
True.
I don't know how long they will keep PTR open.
Yeah.
I think that was the case. It wasn't the last one, but like one of the PTRs was like really short. No. There was like a PTR that lasted like a week or two, which was like really short. But hopefully they will actually keep it for a decent time.
Mm-hmm. For sure. But yeah, we'll see. And again, when it comes to opinions, reservations, like, for me, I'm very open for the idea of the worker start changes, the Protoss changes. But again, I'm more than happy to change my opinions or my perspective on that as we play tournaments on the PTR, right? Like, that's going to be our role as tournament organizers and as casters, and the role of all the others as well, to run as many tournaments on this so we can get a better idea of whether this is a direction that we want the game to go in or not. Right, like that's something that we have to, that ideally we're able to have a somewhat of a consensus on, or have a little bit more of a better perspective on as well throughout the next couple of weeks. So I feel like it's a little bit weird for people to have a really strong response or a strong reaction now. I feel like it's a little bit better to kind of like keep that at least until you see these games played, and then you can get either confirmation, or you can see that like, oh, like maybe things are going to happen a little bit differently instead. We'll see, right? We'll see once those PTR events do begin, once they start. But otherwise, Jesus. But otherwise, I mean, everyone's been making videos about this and speaking on this, whether it's like Cats, whether it's Uthermal, whether it's Loco. So do check them out. I'm sure they've touched on other things as well, maybe gone into more specificities. I said earlier, when it comes to the worker count starts, I do recommend most like again, Pig is going to be like the most experienced person to speak on this, just because he's casted and organized the most amount of tournaments with that worker change. So I would kind of defer to his opinion on what his thoughts are, and his thoughts from listening to him were just that they would increase variety when it comes to that early game. But again, the mid to late game will still be more or less like similar or the same, except for the fact that Protoss is going to be changing as well. So, so there's a lot that's changing, Pappy. A lot is changing. It's crazy. It's very bold as well, and I do appreciate it. For the past 2 patches, Blizzard has been very bold when it comes to their changes. Once again, showing that they're willing to spice things up and take the plunge and be very, very, again, crazy with their propositions. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. This is better than like, 3 lines of text where it's like, bunker build time has been reduced by like 0.5 seconds, and like the gateway is now warping like 2 to 5 seconds faster or something like that. Like this, like at least we're getting something crazy, which I would argue is better than nothing. But we'll see. We'll see regardless. Again, look forward to the PTR tournaments. They're going to be starting next week. I know that we're going to be hosting our tournaments on the PTR. I'll be speaking to the other tournament organizers like Pigasaur or Stegosaurus, alongside TKL and Comeback TV, alongside Dave and Chicken Man for KSL, alongside SC Boy for Kung Fu Cup, and other events as well. So look forward to it. Do look forward to it. So we'll do our best to bring you as many PTR events as we can, and then we can see for ourselves what works and what doesn't work, and what to pull back on and what maybe to push further on instead. Oh. Let's go. It's pig thumbnail. True. Not sure if possible. But it would be great if tournaments had a PTR tag on TL when they're live. I would hope that they do that. We typically have that tag on for the TLMC. Like we typically have like the in parentheses like TLMC 22 whenever we use the TLMC maps. But I know that we're going to be adding that to at least our titles and our events, and hopefully that's done for the others as well. We'll try. Otherwise, with that, we're going to be wrapping up here. Once again, we'll have another podcast next week, just going over all the other news. We just wanted to have an impromptu podcast going over the patch notes themselves. And yeah, it's crazy. And again, we don't really know when it's going to take place. Hopefully, the PTR does last more than 4 weeks. Hopefully, it lasts more than a month. That is the hope, at least. But we'll see. And likewise, I hope that they're able to, after said PTR period, able to take the feedback of all the games, of the players, of the community even, and make adjustments and changes wherever they need to be. Otherwise, we're going to be heading off. Courage, did you have anything you want to say before we head off? Anything you want to add? I'm sure I missed something.
No, unless you want to go through any of the comments that have been said, then no, I think that is all. Again, I do recommend everybody to go through the bug fixes, because some of the bug fixes you may not expect that there were even bugs there to begin with. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. With that, we're going to be wrapping up here for the time being, and we'll see you guys later. I guess one other thing that I should mention as well is that, from my understanding, voting for the TLMC 22 maps will be open soon TM. I was made aware that soon TM is all I can say, but within the next maybe week or so is when voting should be available. But we'll see. Fingers crossed. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. We'll see you guys tomorrow for GSL. We're going to be casting the GSL. We're going to be rebroadcasting our live cast of GSL Group A and B of the round of 8. That's going to be on Saturday and Sunday, and we'll be live co-streaming the RSL finals on Saturday and Sunday as well. So GSL and RSL all over the weekend. We'll see you then. Until then, ciao. Hasta luego.